Algebra students, you've been doing a great job with quadratics, especially since I haven't given you your own video for these. So just to review, any quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, can be solved using the quadratic formula, which is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, that whole mess divided by 2a. Many quadratic equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 can be factored to the product of two binomials and solved that way, depending on the signs here and what these numbers are. For the most part, kids have a hard time factoring with that a value, so I suggest just using the quadratic formula. If it looks like this, then most of you are pretty good at factoring, and I always recommend that you try to factor before using the quadratic formula. We're going to spend one more day, and this day is going to be a mix of solving all different kinds of quadratics. So you could get a problem that looks like this: 3x to the fourth minus 2x cubed plus 7x squared equals 0. And you might be thinking, that's not a quadratic because this is a fourth degree polynomial. And I would say, well, if you factor out the x squared, you now have a quadratic inside the parenthesis after taking out the greatest common factor. So always look for the greatest common factor before you say you can't figure something out. Now, the other thing that you might now do is see if there's factors of 3 that combine with factors of 7 to have a sum of 2, and the answer is no. I wrote this, I'm going to change this problem slightly to a minus so this works out a little bit better. So if this is a minus, there's still no factors of 3 that combine with factors of 7 to have a difference of 2. But now what you can do is you can use this 0 property. X squared equals 0. That means x equals plus or minus the square root of 0. So x equals 0. There is no positive, negative 0. So that's one solution. The next thing that you can do is say, all right, well, x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, that whole mess divided by 2a. Write down what a, b, and c are. A is 3, b is negative 2, c is negative 7. Plug in those values and solve for x. So x is equal to the opposite of negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared. If this is a negative number and you square it, it will always be positive. Minus 4 times a times c. So that becomes 4 times 3, which is 12. 12 times negative 7 is positive 84, so this becomes plus 84. And then that whole mess divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. So now I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 88 divided by 6. I go over to some scratch work. I say the square root of 88, that's equal to the square root of 4 times 22. That's equal to the square root of 4 times 2 times 11. One of these numbers is special, and that's because it's a square. So I can say this is 2 plus or minus 2 root 22 over 6. And my last step is to say this is 1 plus or minus the square root of 22 divided by 3. I get that because there's a common factor of 2 everywhere. So it's a little hard to see with that pen. I'll make it in red. Maybe that's a little bit easier to see. There's a 3 down there. This has a factor of 2, right? It's 2 times 3. So that 2 cancels, and the 2 cancels here, and the 2 cancels there, because it has to be in everything to cancel out. So look, you can solve this. Even though it's not a quadratic, you can solve it using the quadratic formula. This quadratic didn't factor, so you have to use the quadratic formula. In Algebra 2, you'll learn the algebraic method that produces the quadratic formula, but for now I just want you to know the formula. Then you might get something as easy as this. X squared minus 10x minus 24 equals 0. And you say, oh, factors of 24 that have a difference of 10. How about 2 and 12? So a 2 goes here, 12 goes here. This is a minus, so it's plus minus or minus plus. Bigger number gets that sign. And then we write x plus 2 equals 0. We solve and get x equals negative 2. We say x minus 12 equals 0. We solve, we get x equals 12. So tomorrow you could get an example that's as easy as that, and you move right along. So be prepared for either problem tomorrow, and know that you're going to get a mix of all of them to make sure you can solve any quadratic equation you see. All right, have a good night. Peace.